you got to know when to lead and when to follow, right? And you got to give up to get up. I've always kept those two things very close to me. So, by giving more to the people that matter, you get more.
If you haven't heard the term the Great Resignation, you've likely experienced its effects. Frontline employees, professionals, executives have left the workforce and considered many different ways to reevaluate, reframe their lives, and it's become a huge challenge for businesses. This two-part series seeks to answer those questions. I've invited two experts to join me back on the show and co-host these episodes with me, Travis Revelle and Sam Salah. Can't wait for you to listen in. I'm Dr. Nate Salah, and this is a call to leadership. Sam, Travis, welcome to the show. So glad to have you as my special guest on a very important episode that I wanted to invite you on because of your subject matter expertise. This second issue that we're facing with the pandemic, which has been called the Great Resignation, right? People are literally saying, I'm not sure that I want to work right now, or I want to work for this firm, or I want to work in this industry. And so we have massive issues with that. We have massive issues, of course, with employers. We have massive issues also at home, and so some say, well, these guys are just being lazy. It's just, they just need to go back to work. And I don't think it's just that simple, right? No. I mean, there's more to it than that. But let me just read some stats to you. I mean, this is huge. Right now, 94% of U.S. retailers are having difficulty filling vacant positions, right? You both have worked in retail. Is that a problem? What does that mean?
Well, I can tackle that first if you're all right with that, Trav. Go for it. Yeah, I think that it's not about laziness, right? Because that's kind of the first initial reaction. Well, nobody wants to work. They must not be motivated to work. Employers need to build more value within an organization, right? Culture has to be right. I don't think this is all one particular thing, but I also believe that this is the time for employers to build value in working for their employees to work for the organization. Because if your organization doesn't have a good culture, a good way to grow, incentives, this was just timing, was eventually going to happen with the right particular situation. So I think it's a great opportunity for employees to really take a hard look at what kind of value they offer to their employees. If the value isn't great, and you're going to lose people to other employers who are incentivizing people to leave their jobs to come work for them, because finding good people is difficult right now. And the cost of training and rehiring is way more than just paying someone right and keeping great performers and A players within your organization.
Yeah, recruiting and retaining they look much different now than they did 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would call it the great rebalancing of power. Because, well, in one regard, right, we're, entrepreneurs like ourselves, like we were in the corporate world at one time, and we left because we thought, I'm going to bet on myself. I think I can do it better. And so I'm not going to take anything away from these people who are leaving jobs that they're not satisfied with, and they feel whether they can do it through gigs, short-term employments. I'm not going to discount that they have realized that their worth is more than what traditional entry-level jobs or positions are willing to pay them. And so, I applaud these people for trying to go out and do it. And let's be real, right? Like, there are, Shipt. You can go grocery shopping for people. You can, become a taxi driver overnight. You know what I mean? For people. I mean, there are multiple different ways where people can make the same amount of money that they would make going to work for $9-10 an hour and do it on their own schedule. They can be their own boss. And, I think that as time goes on, right, there's people who, just like all entrepreneurs, they're going to hit a wall. And that's where, the rubber meets the road with these individuals is, are they going to push through that wall, or are they going to say, okay, I tried it. This is hard, right. Like we all know that, right? It's hard, running your own business. Let me go back into the job market. But I don't think that throwing somebody an extra $2 an hour right now is going to, change the dynamics so incredibly that people just start lining up for jobs.
Are we talking about entrepreneurship though? Because at the end of the day, so it's different for every situation. You bring up a very good point, because that particular situation is someone who's working in the corporate world or for a small business and they want to go out on their own. That's a completely different challenge for an employer, right? Because at the end of the day, they want to be self-employed. They want to be their own boss.
Or maybe they don't know.
Well, they don't.
There's a discovery period for them
right now, right? I mean,
right.
there's just so many options right now for people. I mean, look, the power is in the people's hands. It's not in the employer's hands anymore, right?
Right.
I mean, when I talk to younger kids, they don't have these aspirations like I did of, working for a company, growing, becoming a senior level executive. Like they've watched their parents do that, right? They've watched their parents be unhappy and miserable. They don't necessarily want to be lawyers or doctors, right? They want to be entrepreneurs. They want to be business. They want to make money. You know what I mean? Like they
more than
make
ever,
money.
Which is not a direct correlation.
It's not, right? But I think it's just, I think that we are in this great shift in our society, right? And I think that it's been happening for years, but we've got a generation of kids now who have only been raised on the internet. So finding a way to make money on the internet, whether it's through YouTube, right? I mean, there's a million different ways, right? Like there's a million different ways to make money. And people realize that, like, why am I going to go and stand at a mall kiosk for 8 hours a day and make $50? Like that's just not something I think that is enticing to them anymore. And if they don't see a future, right? I mean, how much shopping is done in malls, right? I mean, I think about that. I mean, just think about it. It's more than just not having employees. It's a whole new dichotomy shift in our society and where it's heading. And this is a precursor. Now, I will put the caveat out there that, obviously the government stimuluses that have happened, right, have probably made this worse.
Contributed in some ways,
right?
yeah.
And I think that as that continues to peel back, there's going to be more people who obviously need to probably find employment. But in the short term, there's other opportunities for them that they can do on their own.
You bring up a good point. You think about the information age we live in, right? And you say it's not, things aren't vacuous. They're not solo. But when you bring all these different pieces of a setting together, it creates an entire new way of thinking. And so you've got the pandemic, people certainly reevaluating their lives during this time, right? Mm-hmm. I'm more than my job, as some are saying. And then you have this other piece, this information age, where not only this next generation, but also our generation and others are able to tap into a collective now of communication and understanding and information, which then gives them more access to possibilities, right? Because when we were coming up as entrepreneurs, we didn't have the internet.
No.
We didn't have all of these resources. What do? We talked to people, we saw some stuff, then maybe we read a little bit. I remember reading Entrepreneur Magazine. It was like the only resource, and it was actually a magazine. I had to wait to get the next copy.
Yeah, so I think there's something else that's really directly connected to that. It's all great for everybody to make more money. That's what we all want, right? People want to make more money. What happens if you're a small business and your payroll costs go up 25, 30%? Two things are going to happen, one or the other. You're going to go out of business. You'll be able to absorb that through your revenue, okay? Or you're just going to raise your prices. Welcome to inflation.
100%.
Right? So let me give you an example. I obviously go to Starbucks all the time. We go to Starbucks all the time. I never really look like I know what I buy costs, And I looked at it the other day, and it went up. Like literally, the price of the coffee I've been buying for X amount of years is now 40% more expensive.
Really?
Yeah.
Mine hasn't changed.
Well, you haven't looked very close.
No, mine's $3.77.
Yeah, mine was in the threes.
Yeah.
And it's I don't remember the exact number, but it was like 4 something.
Are you're probably drinking some like oat milk or some?
No, it's not. Trust me, it's not as foo-foo as your drink, I'm sure. But no, what I'm saying is it's a direct correlation that when costs rise, that cost is typically going to be passed off to the end consumer. So
100%.
So if I'm paying 30% higher wages, I have to directly build that into my revenue model to absorb that 30%. So at the end of the day, inflation can involve multiple things in multiple ways. But I think if you're talking about increasing costs because a small business is obviously going to have more of a struggle absorbing costs than maybe a Fortune 500 company, right? That's, that has profits that are far exceeding what,
more leverage in some ways as well.
So they could absorb that, right?
Yeah.
So what happens? Maybe these employees go work for a bigger company. Maybe they get more money by leaving us. So I think it just puts more stress on Main Street, small businesses in general, makes them less competitive, less the ability to be more competitive with some of the bigger and Fortune 500 companies offering these kind of jobs. And you'll see a shrink in small business and people that had mom and pop stuff. And it's sad in general to see that, because I think you're just creating more of a corporate based market where it's large corporations and these type of things. And we're seeing it today where less and less small businesses are still there from a year ago. And it's just, to me, I think that cost that is not going to be absorbed typically by the business. It's going to be passed on through costs, directly passed on to the consumers.
Listen to this. So I was talking with a friend the other day, and he was saying how his costs have gone up about 30%, and he said he was going to raise his prices 30% to cover it.
Right.
And then he asked another friend, why don't you go back to your employer and ask for a 30% raise? And he's like, I'm not going to do that. And the employer is a major corporation. And he said, why not? All your costs are going up by 30%. You need more money. And it's an interesting question. And what's happening here? I mean, this is part of this conversation. Like, what happens when you go back to your employer and ask them for a 30% raise?
They're going to tell you no.
They're going to tell you no.
I mean, they're going to tell you absolutely no.
Or when it evens out and this completely, the market changes and sways, because there'll be a point where the costs for these jobs are going to drop back down, because there are going to be more people wanting work that will work for less than what they're working for maybe post-pandemic. And then what? Then you're going to be maybe an employee who's liable because you're making too much money at a company and someone's willing to do the job for less. So I think eventually, this is the framework. Now we can argue how long this is going to last, but I think eventually, it will come down, and then you may be sitting there with 30% more money, but also 30% better chance to be replaced as well.
Yeah, I think that any shifts like this happen over decades and decades. I mean, if you look back, right? I mean, I think power to the people, quote unquote, power to the people, right? You probably haven't had this type of power since the unions in the 30s and 40s, right? Yeah. And that shifted, and then they really held the power structure until probably Reagan, right, in the 80s, and then it shifted back to corporations, and it's been this, the pendulum has swung so far, and now, right, like I don't think the positions that you're referring to, right, like salaried positions, people making 150 grand a year, right, like they're probably not quitting the same way. We're talking about entry level employees, right? We're talking about your mom and pops, like those people. Chances are those companies aren't going to be here in 5 years. They're definitely not going to be here in 10 years, right? The world is changing. Now, I'm not saying it's changing for the better. I'm just saying there is a massive shift that is happening. And I think, Nate, you bring up a good point, right? There isn't one particular thing that you can point to, right? I mean, obviously COVID, lockdowns, right? I mean, like government stimulation that happened because of that are all, accelerating it. But you start looking at what's going on with the metaverse, and you start looking on how much money is being made in NFTs, right? NFT is not an acronym I knew 7 months ago.
Right. Sure.
And now you've got guys like Gary Vee who are making $40 million in a week, right? In selling NFTs and creating a metaverse. And you've got people like Bill Gates saying in 3 years, you're not going to be doing Zoom meetings anymore. You're going to be, an avatar basically sitting at your house with a virtual reality headset on, going to meetings, right? Like the world is changing, right? And there's going to come a point where the dinosaurs that we are, right, are going to go extinct, right? Because you're going to have to operate in a digital world. And so I think we're seeing just the beginning stages. And so if you're a company right now, I mean, you guys hear this term, I've used it for years, you either adapt and overcome or you're going to die. Like there is no time to sit around and hypothesize and say, oh, how can we make it better? Like you need to be acting today, right? You need to be doing something today for your employees to either paint a picture that you're going to have a very progressive type of development program where they have a piece of the pie, right? Like if I was going to tell a small to medium-sized business, how do you keep employees? Find a way to do revenue sharing with them, right? Find a way to attach them to the pie, because then they're going to feel, and rightfully so, that they're a part of something bigger than just showing up, clocking in and clocking out. And as soon as profits might drop, well, they're going to get fired, right? I mean, employees are treating employers the same way employers treat employees for years and years, right? Well, I'm going to pay you just enough so you don't quit, right? Not anymore, but I'm going to pay you just enough. And I think that in our world that we live in now, where everybody wants a Rolex, everybody wants a Benz, everybody wants the things, the stuff, that doesn't cut it anymore. You know, I mean, it doesn't cut it.
No, and this is a good kind of a transition when we're talking about just transactional business, transactional leadership, because we've operated in the transactional space, and there's nothing wrong with transactions. We need them. But people I think are starting to want more than just a transaction. They want a transformation.
I think it's great.
And it is great. So part of the problem though is, okay, so you've seen it everywhere you go, driving by the Golden Corral, walking in the Panera, wherever, I mean, the supermarket, right? What is one of the first things you see? A sign that says what?
We're going to give you $500 sign-on bonus.
That's it.
$750. $1,000.
Right? So we're still talking about transactions here.
Right.
And so, but the signs aren't going away because there's a problem, because it's just not enough.
It's not enough. It's not enough, and it's not going to be enough, because I don't think we're talking about a short-term fix here. Again, in my mind, we're looking at a global societal change, right? A shift in the dichotomy of how we live, breathe, work, love, everything. And right, not to get like super heavy and deep, but when you're dealing with something like that, when you're dealing with a massive change in society, throwing $750 at somebody is putting a Band-Aid on a shotgun wound.
Yeah, but they're not thinking about that. I think it's initial like, oh, I get $750 if I come work here, because at the end of the day, is working at Chinooks a long-term thought process in general, or are you just band-aiding a situation you're in to move on to the next position? And that's okay with Chinooks, or that's okay with because they need people, right?
What we're talking about is how do you get past that, right? How, if you're a business owner, how do you combat these things? And I think money is integral, right? In giving somebody a living wage and giving somebody the ability to have a life, right? I mean, that's what these people are talking about, right? They want a better life. And so I think that when you're looking at it from a transactional standpoint, you do need employees, right? Chinooks needs baggers. Yeah. But I remember there used to be people who would work at Chinooks for 30 years, 40 years, right? Like they became a bagger, they became, a checker, then they were, a supervisor, and then they were general manager, right? And then, like people would start their own grocery chains, right? You don't have, I don't think people have the same faith in employers that they're going to have that ability like our grandfathers did to just go show up somewhere at 17 years old. You got a job, hire me, and I work there till I die.
100%. And I wonder at what point those signs become an insult. And let me preface it, because as we start to look at a greater utility or greater value that the individual seeks from an ecosystem, whatever you want to call it, right? Then I think at some point, I'm not saying everyone, might look at that and say, really? Is that the best? Is that the best you can do?
Self-worth is a personal thing though, right? So you can say all you want that I'm worth X, right? I've been working at McDonald's for 5 years. I'm worth $35 an hour. You can perceive that I am worth that from a personal perspective. What the market will bear is two totally different things. What's happening is the market is bearing it, right? I don't believe it's going to bear it forever. I believe that this will even out. This is my honest opinion. I'm not saying I could be completely wrong, but I do think that build your self-worth, not because a job is in demand, but because you want to make yourself in demand, right? So better yourself, get skill sets that are in need, and as an employer, these people who come into your organization and grow and become, I'm thinking about the ones in my companies, right? That, that have grown within my organization, right? And what has kept them within my organization. A lot of things you talked about, Travis. Sense of entrepreneurship. So they feel like they're a part of the company. They get compensated well. They're incentive based. They will like working, I say this in a humble way, under my leadership, because, at the end of the day, there's other options out there for them, but I give them the ability, you got to know when to lead and when to follow, right? And you got to give up to get up. I've always kept those two things very close to me. So, by giving more to the people that matter, you get more, right? And then by listening and allowing your leadership to be flexible with information that they give you and making those decisions, they feel like they're a part of what you're creating or what they're creating. Really, I don't talk about myself very much. I talk about my team more, right? So I think that leadership, can be more than monetary, like a monetary value to the employee, right? So like if you like working under someone's leadership, you'd lean more towards not leaving than leaving just because of the way the person's leadership style is, or you respect them, or you just, so I think that that's a responsibility and is also a duty to you for any kind of leader in a company, that you create that sense of ownership with your employees, that sense of communication, that they can have input on where the company's going. That has, to me, more than anything that's a monetary value. Yeah, you should be paying what the market will bear, right, to stay competitive. But what gets you above that is your leadership.
Well, and studies support that, where people are generally, not all people, but people are generally willing to work for less money to invest in the cause they believe in, hands down. So when you're talking about, you're talking about cause-based leadership, right? Here's our cause, here's our mission, and we're going to share in taking ownership and achieving that, and all, as you had stated, reaping the reward together, right? When you tell someone it's $500 to start, you get some free food, right? You get flexible hours, right? None of that speaks to any of those deeper aspects of why people would even do that. And I'll give you an example. Even in my own family, my niece took a job making less at a pet store than she could have at Target, right? The pet store. She loves animals. She loved their culture. She loved the ownership, right? Sure. And I think it was like a 25 to 30% pay cut. And just came back the other night and said, you know what? I really like this company. I think I want to continue to move into management here. And what does that say, man? I mean, that speaks volumes.
She's following what she's passionate about. Yeah. I mean, again, I think there's a difference between a job and a career, right? And so I think when we're talking about a lot of these companies, they traditionally have been set up to be an entry-level job. But that's not the way of the world. Those jobs, people need to make money. You know what I mean? And so they stay at those jobs. And I totally agree, right? Leadership is by far and away, I think, the single largest attribute that you can have to help fix this. But I don't think that leadership alone will fix what we're going through right now.
Can I give you an example?
This is bigger than leadership.
Of where it worked, the opposite way. So I had a specific employee leave one of my organizations to go somewhere else and make more money. Realized that the more money did not equate to the company culture I provided, which was a little bit more money. And the grass is always greener, of course, approach. Yeah. And realized that. And one of the best compliments I've had was, coming back to you made me realize how great this place is compared to everywhere else. like experiencing, working for you for this many years and going to see what other places are like that maybe are offering me more money makes me realize how great of a work culture you've created. So to me, that is like, to an entrepreneur or anyone in leadership of an organization, that's what you want to hear. If you don't see people leave and say, hey man, you want them to regret leaving, right? Because you want to create such a great place to work that they feel like they made a mistake when they left, and that's
unless they leave in a way that continues to move their vision of their lives forward. I've had situations to where I have had people leave me that were inspired by my framework, my leadership, and they're like, hey, Nate, with tears streaming, I want to go open my own company. It's just so difficult to leave you, but you've made a believer out of me.
It's happened to me more than I can count.
You leave with my blessing.
You leave with my blessing.
I want you to be fulfilled. I want you the best version of yourself that you can be, right? Work in your genius zone. How many employers are willing to not only say that, but to actually live up to it?
And that's why I'm sitting here and I'm like, yeah, this is so basic for the two of you because you are the epitome of what a good leader and steward of your employees are. But what we're talking about is the real world, right? Where 99.9%, right, of these companies, right, it's not the same. And yes, we could sit here for the next 10 years and try to inspire people to be better leaders. But right now, I would say that a lot of these companies are going to hit the crisis zone, right?
Yeah.
I was reading articles on how right now, there are no layoffs, right? There are no terminating employees. And so, I think in essence, what that's doing is that's hurting culture because if you're looking at employees that they're not meeting their standards, they know that you're not going to terminate them, right? They are not fearful at all on losing their job whatsoever. What type of culture is that going to lead to, right?
Right.
You're cutting off, basic front level managers at the knees, right? Because they're looking at it. They have a schedule. They have a schedule they have to have, right? Doors have to be open, and if we all know if the employees don't show up, who's next, right? The assistant manager, the supervisor, the manager. Those are the people who are really going to have the worst case scenario because they have bought into a larger organization because they have the title.
Sure.
They probably don't make that much more money than their frontline employees, right? But they're saddled with all of this issue. And I think that that's where you're going to start to see this in waves, right? Like right now we're dealing with, for lack of better words, frontline employee waves, right? But the next is going to be your very low level managers, and then you're going to get your district managers. Then you're going to get your and this is just going to be a wave that is happening. It's a tsunami that is happening to corporate America, and we're at the beginning. You know what I mean? Like we're at the very beginning, and so executives are who need to be listening to this. Who can leaders of HR, right? Like those are the people that need to be listening to this right now, with a extreme sense of urgency. That something's got to change right now.